Hey guys, welcome to Franklin Woodworks. I was recently asked to make a salad bowl, a really big salad bowl. The problem is that my lathe, a Rikon 70-220 VSR, isn't big enough. It only has the capability to turn a bowl 12.5 inches in diameter. I needed one that would do at least 17 inches. Well, I wasn't going to buy a new lathe, so I had to come up with something else. I decided to make risers for the lathe. Ideally, the risers should be made of cast iron or some other metal, but that would make the expense too great. I had some old hickory laying around, and that stuff is pretty hard, so I decided to give that a try. I had previously milled up this hickory for another project that went away, so I used the table saw to make sure the edges were true and dimensioned to the width of the Rikon's bed. The first time I saw anyone making risers for their lathe, it was Kyle Toth. I'm basically using his design, but I had different challenges than he had. He had a massive lathe with a movable headstock. My headstock is fixed, but fortunately it interacts with the lathe bed the same way. So, using a dado blade, I began to cut the center mortise, for lack of a better word, that would accept the tenon, for lack of a better word, of the head and tailstock. I slowly worked my way to the proper width, always running the workpiece through using both sides for reference. This ensures the mortise is perfectly centered. Then I had to make a tenon that would fit into the mortise so I could stack the pieces on top of each other to give me an adjustable amount of rise. It was at this point that I realized the main difference between Kyle Toth's version and the version that I would need. On Kyle's lathe, the motor is on the headstock. On mine, the motor is attached under the bed, and a belt is used to drive the spindle. So I wouldn't be able to change the height of the risers unless I had a belt for each height. So I got another idea, and it turned out to be a good one, but I'll get to that later. Once I had the tongues and grooves cut, I cut the workpiece into 3 stackable sections that were the appropriate width for the headstock. Then I had to cut out the middle of each piece so the drive belt could go through the center. The bolts that normally hold the headstock to the bed were pretty thin, so I couldn't find bolts the same size that were long enough to accommodate the risers. So I bought bigger, longer bolts and tapped the existing holes to accept the new bolts. Here's where my other idea came into play, and it was a good one. I enlarged the mortise on the middle riser block about 1/16 of an inch so that I could have some adjustability. Since the headstock and tailstock have to be perfectly in line, this would give me a small amount of wiggle room that I would need to give me the adjustability needed. For the tailstock, I needed a center channel for the tightening mechanism to run through, and I also needed to lengthen that mechanism. A coupling nut and a length of threaded rod, cut to the same length as the height of the risers, gave me the extended length I was looking for. For some reason, I forgot to film most of this step, but I glued all the sections of the riser blocks together. Before the glue had a chance to set up, using that little bit of wiggle room I created on the middle riser block, I made sure the headstock and tailstock were in alignment, then I clamped them down and allowed the glue to dry. For the Banjo, I didn't need the same height as the risers, but I did need a little bit of a boost in the height of the tool rest. So, using a slab of 2x material, I traced the outline of the Banjo and routed away everything inside the line to a depth of about 3/16 of an inch. This will allow the Banjo to sit in a groove on the riser, and the two will stay together as I slide them around on the lathe. Then, using a jigsaw, I cut out the middle to allow for the tightening mechanism to move freely as the Banjo is designed to do. Then over to the bandsaw to cut the riser out to the final shape. Another coupling nut and some threaded rod, and all that's left to do is adjust the mechanism so it loosens and tightens the correct amount. So with almost 4 additional inches on the headstock and tailstock, and 1 3/4 inches on the Banjo and tool rest, I have the right height for my turning tools. So I've gone from a lathe with 12.5 inches of capacity to a lathe with 20 inches of turning capacity. Even though I've raised the center of gravity of the lathe, I still have 320 pounds of concrete on the lathe stand to help keep vibrations from getting out of hand. Since I didn't increase the horsepower of the lathe, I won't be loading tree stumps on here for turning. But most projects of this size will be segmented, so the horsepower shouldn't be a problem. My next video will be of the big salad bowl, just to prove to you this works. This is a perfect opportunity to hit that subscribe button to make sure you don't miss it. I really enjoy figuring out ways to make do with the tools that I have, and I hope this gives you some good ideas for your shop. Thanks for watching, and there you go.